desert runways lit in the dark, searchlights over New Mexico, radar screens screaming in a Pentagon war room. For 70 years, America's strangest stories have orbited a few points on the map. A secret test range called Area 51, a quiet ranch outside Roswell, lonely debris fields in the middle of nowhere, and the windowless offices at the heart of the U.S. defense machine. We've heard the myths, crashed saucers, reverse-engineered craft, cover-ups reaching all the way to Washington. But you're not just hearing stories, you're going into the files. In this film, we stitch together 4 investigations. What really sits on the tarmac at Area 51, what actually fell from the sky in 1947, what the scattered debris really tells us, and what the modern Pentagon's own documents say about the UFO crisis it tried to manage with paperwork. You'll see the deserts where witnesses stood, the debris fields they described, and the classified memos that tried to explain it all away. We'll walk the hangars where experimental aircraft blurred into legend. We'll pull apart the Roswell press releases, line by line, to see how a single headline rewired UFO history. We'll stand over wreckage laid out on dusty tables, asking what's signal and what's noise. And we'll follow the paper trail into today's UAP office, where new footage and whistleblower claims collide with radar tracks and internal briefings. Some answers are hiding in plain sight, stamped and filed. Others live in the gaps, the redactions, the missing tapes, the sightings that never reached a form. By the end of this journey, you'll know what the evidence really shows and what it doesn't. So tighten your seatbelt, keep your eyes on the horizon, and stay to the very end. Because the most important signal in this story isn't in the sky. It's in the documents America never expected you to see. This is America Unexplained, Files, Sights, and Signals. Night over New Mexico. A rancher finds something in the grass that doesn't belong to weather, wind, or fence wire. By morning, Roswell Army Airfield says it plainly. A flying disc was recovered. Hours later, the message flips. Photographs, foil, a tidy explanation that leaves untidy questions. What crashed in 1947? Who decided how the story should sound? And why did the most ordinary sky suddenly feel crowded? This is America, Unexplained. Roswell, 1947.
July 1947. A quiet stretch of desert. A find in the grass that doesn't fit the weather, the wind, or the rancher's memory of ordinary things. By afternoon, Roswell Army Airfield puts it in print. A flying disc has been recovered. For one news cycle, the impossible is official. Then, snap, the story changes. Photographs, foil, and a neat explanation arrive faster than questions can line up. Roswell isn't only about what fell. It's about how stories are born, steered, and then argued with for generations. So here are our rules. First, paper before rumor. We read what was written that week, releases, cables, captions. Second, chain of custody. Who handled what, where did it go, and what was shown to cameras. Third, language counts. The difference between disc, balloon, and something the vocabulary of 1947 didn't quite have yet. Fourth, context matters. The early Cold War valued silence, compartmentalization, and plausible cover more than tidy public narratives. We are not here to close the case. We are here to keep the window open. Facts first, mystery intact. If an explanation can carry the weight, we'll show it. If it can't, we'll mark the gap without filling it with wishful thinking. How did a single headline become the longest-running mystery in American airspace? Rewind to day 1, when the crash still belonged to the pasture and the paper.
If you like mysteries with receipts, subscribe. We'll follow the paperwork together. Tap the hype button below. It's free, only counts in the first 7 days, and helps push this episode up the hype leaderboard. Fact check me in the comments, I can handle the cuffs.
If you want to support the investigation, grab the Roswell poster or an America Unexplained tee at the Timeless Tales shop, link in the description.
Chapter 1. The Crash That Wrote the Headlines.
Night breaks over the high desert. Wind in the grass. Wire fences ticking. A rancher, W.W. Mac Brazel, rides fence lines after a summer storm and finds a scatter of material that doesn't belong to weather, wind, or ranch chores. It is light. It is in pieces. It is wrong for anything he keeps in the barn. Days pass with the debris on his mind. He brings some in, shows neighbors, decides it's odd enough to tell the sheriff. Sheriff George Wilcox listens, weighs the story, and makes the call that changes the tempo. He contacts Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomb Group. Military steps are practical and fast. Intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel and a plain-spoken counterintelligence man, Sheridan Cavett, travel to the ranch. They walk the field. They crouch, lift, bend, test. The pieces feel stubborn for their weight. Some look like foil, some like sticks, some like fragments of a device. And none of it looks like airplane wreckage to men who know what airplane wreckage looks like. Chain of custody begins in the dirt. Gather, bag, load. A portion travels back toward town with Marcel. More is left for follow-up. The routine rhythms of a small post snap into a higher register. Phone calls. A public information officer on alert. Officers back and forth between offices that can make statements and offices that prefer not to. Then the line that still startles historians. Roswell Army Airfield tells the press it has recovered a flying disc. The language is matter of fact. The tone is official. Rumors, it says, are now reality. The material is in Army hands. In a single dispatch, the strange ranch field has a label, and the label has gravity. The newsroom reaction is immediate. The wire services move the item. Headlines crowd into evening editions. In the span of one news cycle, an impossibility sits on a front page with the calm posture of routine government news. Phones ring, editors reach for maps. Readers reach for a word they don't quite have yet. UFO is years away. The term of the moment is flying disc. Back on the ground, cameras wait for access that hasn't been granted. The base itself remains a filter. What gets shown on purpose. The idea that the U.S. Army Air Forces have picked up a disc is big enough to tug at other stories. Odd lights months earlier, radar blips that didn't cooperate, rumors about what the war taught engineers, and what the peace is teaching spies. We pause on the paper trail. Who signed the release? Who approved the phrasing? What, exactly, did they think they had in those first hours? It matters because first language is rarely accidental. The plainness of the words, disc recovered, is either a simple mistake, a premature guess, or a straight report that would not age well by sundown. What we can say from the documents and the timeline is this. Material was found on the Foster Ranch. Civilians and military touched it. A statement was made that pointed away from weather and toward something extraordinary, and the country heard it. That is the moment Roswell becomes more than a local oddity. It becomes a national file, stamped with an official title before anyone has had time to write the index. Hold here. Freeze the frame on the headline. A base, a ranch, a sheriff, an intelligence officer, a pile of stubbornly light debris, and a sentence that lets the world use the word disk without irony. Everything that follows will either explain that sentence or explain it away.
If that's the routine paperwork, I can't wait to see what they file under, "Oops, bring the photographers." Chapter 2. From Disk to Balloon, the fastest U-turn in the West.
The headline is barely dry when the center of gravity shifts east. A selection of debris travels under orders, first to Roswell Army Airfield for handling, then onward to higher command. The next frames in the reel are not a pasture, but an office. Neutral carpet, maps on the wall, a general who understands that pictures can speak faster than corrections. Enter Fort Worth. Reporters and photographers are ushered in to see the material the public is now told caused all the commotion. Sticks, foil, balloon remnants, the ribs and facets of a radar target. Items that look as if a hardware store met a meteorology class. In front of the lenses, a general demonstrates with the calm of someone rapping a narrative. The flying disc is actually a weather balloon with a radar reflector. No mystery, just misidentification. The photographs do heavy lifting. They show officers kneeling, pointing, arranging, a pile of foil that catches flashbulbs like it was built for publicity, not physics. Labels follow fast. Captions, wire copy, a new round of headlines now pushing against the old. If the first story lit a fuse, this one is designed like a firebreak. What changed between morning and afternoon? The chain of custody is a timeline written in truck tires and phone calls. Intelligence officers handle the field collection. Senior command takes over the messaging. Once the story moves to Fort Worth, the center of decision-making is no longer the small base that first spoke plainly. It's a headquarters that speaks strategically. The language changes too. Yesterday's disk recovered becomes today's balloon identified. That swap is not only a label, it's a theory of the entire event. A balloon explanation implies a category error at every prior stage. The rancher mistook it. The sheriff escalated it. The intelligence officer didn't recognize it. And a public information officer misphrased it. Possible, yes. Convenient, also yes. Consider the mechanics of a photo op. Someone calls the press. Someone gathers prop pieces, arranges them where cameras can see, and says the right words with the right objects in frame. If you're correcting an honest mistake, you need clarity. If you're managing a classified edge case, you also need clarity, just of a different kind. Both scenarios use identical tools: pictures, captions, authority. Meanwhile, the public is whipsawed. Breakfast, discount. Dinner, balloon. The mind tries to reconcile two incompatible rooms. In one, a ranch field full of stubbornly lightweight material handled by men trained to know aircraft wreckage. In the other, a tidy demo of foil and sticks, taught to look harmless. The speed of the flip becomes part of the mystery. The neatness, too. We keep to paper and sequence. Orders are issued, the route changes. An office becomes a stage. The retraction lands with the certainty only a general can deliver. But it leaves questions scattered around the edges, like the debris it claims to explain. Why did the first release use the boldest possible word? Why did a correction require cameras instead of just cables? Why the haste? There's also the human factor. Careers dislike embarrassment. Commands dislike improvisation from below. If the first statement outpaced the facts, a public demonstration offers a decisive reset, and a lesson to the ranks. Next time, call before you publish. If, on the other hand, the first hours touched something adjacent to classified work, then the correction performs two jobs: cooling the rumor and reheating the ordinary. Neither possibility excludes the other. The U-turn could be part error, part policy, and part the Cold War's preference for controlled narratives. What the photographs certainly do is shift burden of proof. The press, and then the public, must now defend the extraordinary against a convenient, familiar object placed neatly on an office rug. Freeze frame this chapter on a general pointing at foil while photographers scribble captions. It is the most documented moment in the Roswell timeline, and the most persuasive, if you take photographs as the finish line rather than another starting gun. Our rule remains: paper first, chain of custody always, language under a microscope. The balloon story is now the official story. But official and complete are cousins, not twins. Questions to carry forward. Did every person in the first 24 hours see only balloon parts and fail to recognize them? If not, what else? Materials, context, timing was present in those first decisions. And why did the narrative need the theater of a photo room?
If that's case closed, somebody forgot to close the box. Half the questions are still sticking out the lid. Chapter 3. Debris, Bodies, and Memory Wars.
If Chapter 2 is photographs and captions, Chapter 3 is voices, remembered, revised, rehearsed, and sometimes contradicted by paper. The debate that keeps Roswell alive doesn't just ask what was found. It asks who we believe and when their stories were told. Begin with the simplest divide: 1947 statements versus late 1970s and later recollections. In 1947, the language is cautious. A press release says disc, a general says balloon, and locals describe curious scraps: light, stubborn, foil-like, stick-like. The paper trail is thin but contemporary. It speaks in telegram brevity. Decades later, a new vocabulary arrives. Interviews, documentaries, and books collect memories sharpened by time and spotlight. Witnesses remember materials that wouldn't burn, crease, or break. Symbols that looked like writing but weren't. Crates in hangars. Guards on doors. Some remember more than materials. Rumors of bodies. Sealed transport. Small forms under sheets that did not move like patients. Memory is evidence, but it's a fragile kind. Psychologists have words for how it bends. Telescoping, pushing distant events closer. Contamination, mixing details from different sources. Rehearsal, the way retelling cements edits. And demand characteristics, stories shaped unconsciously by what we think a listener wants. None of that makes a person dishonest. It makes them human. Still, when a recollection from 1980 corrects a telegram from 1947, we have to decide which kind of error is more likely. Take the unusual materials thread. Some witnesses describe foil that remembered its shape, sticks that felt wrong for balsa, seams that looked manufactured but unfamiliar. Could a balloon array with radar targets produce a fair share of odd impressions in a windy field? Yes. Could something else, prototype components, lab-crafted films, or simply the strangeness of first contact with military hardware, also shape those impressions? Also yes. The closer we get to tactile language, wouldn't burn, snapped back smooth, the more the story leans on subjective thresholds. How hot was the test? How hard was the bend? What counts as normal foil in a rural 1947 toolkit? Then come the bodies narratives. These don't stamp the paperwork until much later. Accounts surface of child-sized forms, unusual stretchers, tight security, and a hospital that behaved like a secret had a pulse. Names enter and exit the file. Morticians, nurses, airmen with memories of orders that didn't fit routine, sealed coffins, special chemicals, warnings not to talk. Here the timeline becomes a field of fault lines. Were the bodies seen in 1947, or are later tests and accidents bleeding into the frame? Did Cold War programs, parachute trials with anthropomorphic dummies in the 1950s, high-altitude mishaps, medical transports, plant later visuals into earlier stories? A plausible overlay doesn't erase the claim, but it does ask the historian's question: why do bodies grow more vivid as the decades lengthen?
Chain of custody returns as our compass. We can map debris from ranch to base to photo room. We can only sketch rumors about remains. No 1947 document we can point to with a finger uses the language of biological recovery. That absence doesn't disprove, it limits what we can responsibly say on camera, without borrowing certainty from rumor. A separate memory war plays out over who said what when. An intelligence officer speaks out in the late 1970s, saying the balloon was a cover. Colleagues disagree on detail and tone. Authors gather interviews, separated by years and telephone lines. Contradictions are edited into arcs that feel coherent. Every retelling wins followers and enemies, as if Roswell needed defense attorneys more than historians. There's also a geographical effect. A story whispered around Roswell in 1947 had few places to echo. A TV documentary in 1987 has 1,000. Once a claim becomes famous, new witnesses may realize their quiet memory now has an audience. Some step forward, some misremember, a few invent. Distinguishing among those categories without courtrooms and subpoenas is part science, part art, and a lot of humility.
So we set working rules for this chapter's pile of testimony. Give weight to statements nearest the event, but not blindly. People can be wrong in real time. Treat later recollections as leads, not verdicts. Prefer particulars over vibes. Measurements, handling steps. Who signed what copy of which form. Mark contradictions and let them stand. Sometimes that's the truest map we can draw. What survives this filter from the combined accounts? A debris field with light, stubborn materials. A fast escalation from sheriff to base. A first-day official use of the word disc. A theatrical, same-day correction in another city. And a widening ring of human stories, some likely true, some likely blended, a few impossible to square with paper, about guards, crates, and forms lighter than they should have been. If the bodies exist only in later memory, the question becomes, why did that image attach itself so tightly to Roswell? Because a machine with no pilot is less dramatic than a crash with passengers. Because the Cold War trained citizens to sense secrets behind doors. Because, perhaps, other incidents, separate in time and place, needed an organizing myth, and Roswell had the headline ready. We won't fix memory with a monologue. We can, however, keep the categories clear. What was written then, what was said later, and what the human mind does to connect the two. In this series, the unexplained is not a vacuum to be filled. It's a perimeter to be respected. Freeze frame here on a page split down the middle. On one side, clippings and teletype. On the other, transcripts and taped interviews. Between them runs the thin wire we'll try not to cut. The possibility that ordinary hardware wore extraordinary timing. Or that extraordinary hardware wore an ordinary costume.
If memories had fingerprints, half our suspects would be smudges, and the other half would be wearing tiny gloves. Chapter 4. Projects, Cover, and Why Roswell Won't Die.
If the first 3 chapters are about a headline and its whiplash, this one is about the room behind the curtain. The Cold War habit of building secrets first and narratives second. Start with the kind of work America was starting in 1947. Engineers and physicists were learning to listen to a planet that had just entered the nuclear age. High-altitude balloon trains, long strings of gas cells and instruments designed to ride a level layer of air, were being tested across the Southwest. The idea: a balloon that could travel far, steady, and quiet enough to catch faint signatures in the sky, acoustic waves, radio whispers, that might betray a distant test or launch. Those balloons needed to be found and tracked. Enter radar reflectors, lightweight, foil-faced targets with geometric ribs that made a balloon's position visible to ground radar. They looked like a craft project until you needed them. Then they were the point at which theoretical physics met please don't lose the payload. None of this was built for public understanding. Most of it wasn't built for public anything. Now put that behind a wall labeled compartmentalized. The Cold War didn't just prefer secrecy, it lived on it. Projects were sliced into need-to-know compartments. A technician might know how to assemble a reflector and never be told what the instrument package was hunting. A base public information officer might know the words he can say on a normal day and have no clearance for the abnormal one. In such a room, plausible explanations aren't just convenient, they're policy. This is where the why of Roswell's U-turn lives. If a classified test scattered odd-looking hardware on a ranch, the first responders could have been exactly what they appeared to be: local military dealing with local debris. The second responders, the ones with access to classification markings and program managers, would then do what the Cold War trained them to do: swap vocabulary, stage a demonstration, cool the rumor. Weather remains the most polite word in a lexicon of covers, and balloon is a label that explains almost anything floaty from 50 feet away. Does a balloon program explain everything? Not quite. It can explain foil, sticks, reflectors, and a reason to tidy up fast. It can explain why a correction needed to be so theatrical, reset the narrative once, publicly, and discourage improvisation by subordinates. But timing and tone still ask for attention. If classification drove the correction, why was the first release so bold? Did a public information office outrun its leash? Did an intelligence officer speak too plainly before a phone upstairs rang? Those are process questions with human answers, not alien ones, and they matter. Then there's the long tail. As the 1950s and early 1960s unfurl, balloon programs multiply and specialize. Some carry cameras or test dummies to study high-altitude ejection. Others stretch for days, mapping winds. Each program generates its own field notes, mishaps, recoveries, and rumors. Decades later, when memories try to stitch a single story from many threads, scenes from different years can bleed together. A 1950s dummy drop can migrate into a 1947 crash in the mine's editing bay. The map is complicated enough that even honest recollection can misplace a pin.
So why won't Roswell die? Partly because it has the perfect skeleton for a lasting legend. A first-day official phrase, flying disc, that feels like a confession. A same-day pivot that feels like choreography. Artifacts that look familiar enough to be dismissed and odd enough to be argued over. A Cold War setting where silence was standard and paperwork traveled in locked bags. And later, testimony that expands the cast and raises the stakes. Legends don't need absolute proof. They need a rhythm the public can remember. Roswell has it. Every retelling becomes a referendum on which line you underline: disc or balloon, pasture or photo room, paper, or memory. The more we argue, the more the case keeps a pulse. What do we do with that pulse in a series called America Unexplained? We keep the rules we promised. Paper first, chain of custody mapped where possible, language inspected. We allow declassified programs to carry the weight they can, without letting them carry more than they should. A balloon array can account for hardware. It can't, by itself, explain why a local base issued a headline that felt like the future. Human error can explain the headline. It can't, by itself, explain the speed and staging of the correction. Between those two realities is the narrow space where mysteries live. Not as gaps to be stuffed with wishful thinking, but as rooms to be left lit while we keep reading.
So, we end Roswell the way we began it, with the discipline to separate what the documents say from what we want them to say, and with the curiosity to admit the remainder, the sliver that keeps the map interesting. The desert doesn't tell stories on our schedule. Neither does a bureaucracy designed to talk only when it must. Carry this forward. Some secrets are about hardware. Others are about habits. Roswell, uniquely, might be both. The hardware had reasons to be in the sky. The habit had reasons to change the subject. Freeze frame on the two images that refuse to merge. A headline that says disk and a photograph that says balloon. Between them runs the country's longest hallway, the one where security meets storytelling.
If the truth's in that hallway, I'll bring snacks. Those briefings can be longer than the runway.
Tap Join to support the series and unlock early chapter drops, members-only posts, and our research notes.
If the gap bothers you, help me measure it. Share this with a friend who bookmarks anomalies.
If this helped you think straighter about Roswell, like the video and subscribe. Damn you. Next, we open the Pentagon's UAP files.
Night returns to the high plains, and the wind goes back to moving only grass. Somewhere between a headline that said disk and a photograph that said balloon, the file kept breathing. That space, the hallway between certainty and convenience, is where Roswell still lives. We've walked it with the rules we promised. Paper first, chain of custody wherever it can be traced, language under a microscope. We've let memory testify without letting it deliver the verdict. Cold War habits explained some things cleanly and left others just out of reach. Timing, tone, and a press release that felt like tomorrow calling from the wrong decade. If there's a lesson here, it's not that mysteries demand belief. It's that they deserve discipline. When you can't close the file, sharpen the questions. When a correction feels theatrical, ask who built the stage. When two images refuse to merge, measure the gap before you start filling it. So we leave the gate the way we found it, patiently. The pasture is quiet, the paperwork is not. And until one of them tells the whole story, we'll keep the window open. Facts first, mystery intact. We see us in Washington, D.C., inside the Pentagon's UAP files.
Look at the horizon. 3 points glide, rotate, then vanish, as if air were optional. The map says Groom Lake, The rumor says Area 51. You want answers. So do we. First, let's see what the desert lets us see. Stand where radar goes quiet and stories get loud. We'll walk the fence, follow the lights, and listen for patterns that repeat when names don't. Tomorrow's aircraft, or someone else's handwriting on our sky. Wonder in. Verdicts out. This is America Unexplained. Episode 1. Area 51.
Maps have borders. Deserts don't. Out past the last road sign, Groom Lake sits where official lines go thin. Before documents, there were fence lines, scanner whispers, and nights when 3 lights moved as one. Two stories chase the same horizon, secret test beds built a decade ahead of language, or borrowed blueprints from a crash no one will sign for. Some witnesses talk about silent lift, edges that swallow radar, turns that ignore the rules. Others say the rules changed. Boundary layer tricks, field effects, composite skins, the start of a new tech tree. The wish list uses forbidden words, anti-gravity, inertia games. But Nevada has a habit. What sounds impossible on Tuesday can taxi before Friday's sunset. We'll stand at the fence and let patterns speak. What repeats? What many see together? What leaves a trace you can time or measure? Everything else is a story. Some stories point the way. This is Area 51.
If this raised your eyebrow, subscribe and come back for the next clue. Tap like. My saddle depends on your approval rating. Drop your wildest theory in the comments. We read them on the trail. Members get the map with extra coffee stains. Join us!
Chapter 1. The Whispered Map.
Out past the last mile marker, the desert stops explaining itself. Fence lines wander. A road goes straight and then forgets why. Groom Lake sits like a sheet of hammered glass. Flat, bright, and impossible to judge for distance. Heat turns scale into rumor. Before there were documents, there were habits. Locals learned which ridgelines give you sky without gifting you to patrol headlights. Chasers picked pullouts by the shape of shadows at sunset. Scanner junkies wrote down call signs like birders, waiting for a voice to return. If a frequency went quiet at the wrong minute, the whole valley seemed to lean in and listen. The whispered map is not a drawing so much as choreography. Park here, kill the dome light, wait for the wind to change. Count heartbeats between far-off strobes. Read the lake's surface like a mirror for traffic you'll never hear. On certain nights, the runway glow wakes early, just a thin pulse against the alkali, as if someone beneath the horizon remembered us. And then there are the 3 lights. They move as one, like corners of a shape you can't quite see. They slide, they pause, they rotate 90 without banking. For a beat, your knees register a pressure change your ears deny. The air should carry something, whistle, thunder, even wind. But the night puts a finger to its mouth. Halfway through the arc, the lights cut. Not a fade, a door shutting. Notebooks became message boards. Message boards became pilgrimages. Advice traded like recipes. Which ridge the heat shimmer loves, where the mirage hides scale, what hour the range pretends it's empty. If you come back enough times, you learn the rhythm. A low drum you don't so much hear as agree with. There are explanations you can reach for. Night refueling seen from a strange angle. Flares that drift like ideas. Classified sorties flying profiles designed to confuse. Hybrid airships whose bulk masquerades as sky. Maybe, maybe not. The desert records the same scene again and again, as if it wants us to learn the beat before it gives us the melody.
The map expands in negative space, a new, no-through dirt road, a gate where there wasn't one, fresh gravel no rain could have smoothed. Someone leaves a triangle of footprints where no one admits to walking. You don't collect proof, you collect returns. Tiny echoes from things that don't want to be nouns yet. Some nights, the ridge gives you nothing, and that nothing is still information. Other nights, a high contrail scribbles the zenith, and a sun-caught glint makes the whole hillside argue. Phones come up, focus hunts, pixels bloom, and every frame misses by a little. That miss becomes part of the ritual, the offering the desert accepts in exchange for another look. No one leads this. The map is communal, handed down in directions and warnings, in coffee at 1 a.m. at the last gas for 50 miles. You hear the same story with different verbs from people who don't know they're repeating each other. Patterns accumulate. Claims multiply. Answers don't. So we stay with the path instead of the verdict. The whispered map isn't a claim. It's a way of moving. From mile marker to pullout. From fence line to ridge line. From 3 lights to the question they refuse to finish. What matters is what repeats, what stacks, what keeps returning to the same coordinates when the wind is down and the stars are honest. We won't decide here. We widen the circle on the map and step to its edge. If there's a melody, it waits in the geometry we keep seeing. 3 points agreeing with each other and disagreeing with gravity.
3 dots make a triangle. A silent triangle makes me walk faster. On to night triangles and silent flight. Chapter 2. Night triangles and silent flight.
Some nights, the sky doesn't carry objects. It carries geometry. 3 points hold their distance, like corners of a rigid frame, gliding as if the air had been negotiated in advance. The formation doesn't wobble. It doesn't hunt for lift. It simply moves. When it turns, it doesn't bank the way wings confess a turn. It rotates, as if the shape itself were the pilot. Witnesses try out verbs and throw them away. Hover isn't quite right. Drift sounds lazy. Glide feels too honest. What sticks is a behavior. A triangle that acts like one body. No strobes, no engine note. Just the sense that motion is happening under different rules. Rules that don't start with more thrust. Distance is the trickster. So is the desert. Depth cues collapse on a dark basin. Stars act like confetti. Mirage pushes scale around until familiar sizes forget themselves. And yet, clusters of reports repeat the same measurements in the human body. The moment your knees register pressure, the way your inner ear insists on a stop without a sound, the small delay when your brain waits for a roar that never comes. Some frames are generous. A long lens catches the 3 points crisp against a shoulder of mountain. A second clip agrees on spacing even as the formation turns. The triangle keeps its proportions, like a blueprint being carried across the sky by someone careful not to crease a corner. You can call it coincidence once, twice. After 10 nights, you run out of synonyms for the same shape. What would fly like that? The repertoire of earthly answers is long and interesting. Coordinated drones can hold formation with the indifference of code. Hybrid airships can hide in night air that treats bulk like a rumor. Boundary layer devices might tame edges, trade turbulence for obedience. A fat wing facing you dead on becomes a line. A set of lights on the belly becomes a triangle you swear is a hull. You can stack explanations like rocks around a campfire. And still, the silence sits there. Engineers talk about signatures: thermal, acoustic, electromagnetic, the footprints a craft can't help but leave. Silent isn't truly silent. It's a signature below your personal threshold. But the threshold of a valley full of listeners is not small. The chasers on the ridges build microphones into their nerves. When a thing crosses with only the stars to vouch for it, the absence is its own kind of mark. Profiles repeat. Long, steady traverse, short hold. A rotate that looks like a compass rose impatient to point somewhere new. Sometimes a near vertical rise to a height where the triangle dissolves into one star too many. Sometimes a slow settle that dares you to blink so it can leave while your eyes are closed. Air doesn't surrender easily. When it does, it makes terms. Silent flight asks for a price you can't see from a fence line. Maybe the price is paid by materials, skins that persuade air to behave. Maybe the price is paid by power, systems that push without the familiar shout. Maybe the price is paid by us, by how the night edits what we can and can't compare to anything we know. There are threads that pull toward craft we can name only later. Flight test tradition says tomorrow's aircraft will look like lies today. The F-117 was a rumor until it wasn't. Tacit Blue was a ghost until it gave up a photo. An entire family tree of edges learned to swallow radar before we had a word that didn't sound like magic. Perhaps this is one more branch, learning to hide its leaves. There are other threads, stories about borrowed blueprints, fragments with seams that aren't seams, metals that argue with magnets, rooms where the word impossible is taped to a wall as a dare. People who swear the sky over Nevada has seen handwriting that isn't ours. We don't choose a thread here. We lay them next to each other and notice how often they cross at 3 points holding steady. How often they predict a rotate instead of a bank. A stop instead of a circle. A rise that feels like a thought changing its mind. Field notes pile up. Plants with no wind help. Temperature inversions turn the basin into a listening bowl. Certain windows open when the range acts tired and the ridges act patient. If you time the valley right, you can watch the same behavior enough times to know when you're early. If you need comfort, the sky offers ordinary things on demand. Planes that admit they're planes. Satellites obedient to orbital math. Meteors whose exits are as honest as their entries. The triangle isn't ordinary. It doesn't pretend to be a star. It borrows the star's confidence and then refuses to be reduced to it. We leave the verdict at the gate. What remains is a pattern that points. 3 lights that choose each other first. Movement that makes its own dictionary. A silence that writes in capital letters. The chapter doesn't end with an answer. It ends with enough repeated strangeness to ask a better question.
If that's a kite, someone stole the wind. On to the reverse engineering hypothesis. Chapter 3. The reverse engineering hypothesis.
The story that won't sit down starts with fragments, edges that look poured instead of joined, surfaces that act like skin one moment and like a circuit the next. In the telling, the pieces arrive in anonymous crates, with ordinary numbers and extraordinary chaperones. They visit rooms where the clocks have no hands and the windows have no view. Engineers in these stories don't speak in legends, they speak in properties. Density without weight, stiffness without seam, surfaces that flatten radar as if it were a rumor, panels that shrug off heat gradients like weather. A tech taps a sample with a gloved knuckle and frowns at a note that doesn't match any metal they know by ear. What could make a craft behave like the triangles we keep seeing? Reverse engineering partisans point to a ladder of possibilities. Not proof, a ladder. Metasurfaces and anisotropic skins that push currents and fields where air would otherwise complain. Lattice materials, ultra-light, ultra-stiff, turning mass into scaffolding that barely counts as weight. Field-coupled control at edges, shaving turbulence until the air behaves like it was asked politely. Power densification that hides thrust in signatures most of us don't carry detectors for. Sensing and control loops fast enough to keep a rigid triangle acting like a single thought. None of this requires magic. All of it would feel like it, until the spec sheet leaks. Then come the harder words, whispered, written on whiteboards and erased before coffee cools. Inertia manipulation, mass coupling, gravity, assists without gravity wells double asterisk. Nobody on record claims a working box that turns weight off, but the hypothesis survives because the sky keeps offering behaviors that suggest a debt paid somewhere we can't audit. If the bill isn't thrust, drag, and lift as we know them, what ledger took the charge? There are quieter branches on the same tree. Hybrid airships with skins that act like batteries. Boundary layer tricks that trade noise for obedience. Edge effects that make a large body look like 3 modest lights from the ground. A craft that presents less surface to sensors than to the air that carries it. Technology that wants to be overlooked until it is ready not to be.
Reverse engineering tales always include a moment when the part teaches the lab how to measure it. In some rooms, microscopes learn new adjectives. In others, magnets argue and then agree. A small rotation changes everything. A temperature you would ignore becomes a key. The lab discovers that the instrument was the mystery all along. Skeptics stand at the same bench and draft a different legend. Mislabeled alloys, manufacturing tricks wearing the mask of miracles, test beds that inherit secrecy from programs with names that will read like fiction when they retire. The crate's stamp means logistics, not crash sites. The room without windows is about contracts, not contact. Maybe. Maybe not. What keeps the hypothesis alive isn't a headline, it's the fit. The way certain materials science stories nest inside certain night sky behaviors. Rigid body triangles, right angle rotates, falls that don't fall. Paired with talk of skins that talk to air, frames that weigh as little as they look. 2 lines that don't meet on paper keep crossing in the desert. We park between them. The triangle doesn't tell us where it learned to be itself. The fragments, if they exist, don't tell us where they were first assembled. But the idea that tomorrow's machines could be built from yesterday's mysteries is older than any fence line at Groom Lake. It's how we behave when something flies before we have the nouns to file it. If a blueprint was borrowed, the handwriting would show up in the margins. In habits, how a craft holds shape under turn, how it budgets heat, how it disappears from microphones without leaving your bones alone. We watch for those habits. We collect them like field notes. We let them pile up until a pattern suggests a family resemblance, without insisting on a surname. We don't resolve it here. We mark the overlap and keep the file open, because the next branch on this tree is the one people are told not to say out loud. You already know the word.
Okay, I'll say it. Anti-what now? If gravity has a settings menu, let's peek. Chapter 4. Anti-gravity and other forbidden words.
There are words the desert teaches people to whisper. One of them is anti-gravity. Not because anyone here has a switch that turns weight off, but because some nights the sky behaves as if someone found a new way to ignore a few old rules. Language balks. Lift is supposed to have invoices, wings, rotors, fans. Thrust is supposed to shout. Here, motion arrives on tiptoe. Turns happen without the confession of a bank. A fall pauses mid-fall, considers something, and leaves. The verbs we own don't always rent well to scenes like that.
Engineers carry their own forbidden dictionary.
They don't write anti-gravity. They write about mass coupling, inertial frames, field interactions. They ask whether a skin can persuade air to stop behaving like air, whether edges can talk to turbulence in a voice it respects, whether a field can borrow the job of a wing for a second and give it back before anyone files a report. Some ideas live on the lab bench. Boundary layer control that trims away drag until speed stops breeding noise. Electro-aerodynamic flows that push a thin breeze where no propeller turns. Magneto-hydrodynamic tricks that ask ionized air to choose a direction and pretend it wanted to all along. None of these cancel gravity. All of them could make gravity feel like it was put on hold from a distance, with a long lens and a hopeful heart. Witnesses talk about falling without falling, a descending triangle that stops like a thought changing its mind. The mountain doesn't echo. The valley's animals don't complain. The only note is a silence with edges. If there were a box that moved inertia around like furniture, we wouldn't hear it. We'd hear the implications. Acceleration profiles that look unbudgeted. Trajectories that don't pay the usual taxes. Turns that keep every cup on board from spilling. That box is a rumor without a spec sheet. The rumor survives because behaviors keep showing up that fit the outline of a tool we don't have vocabulary for yet. Skeptics answer with a stack of careful alternatives. Illusions of range and angle. Drones that choreograph indifference. Airships doing theater. Classified test beds, writing in a typeface not yet taught in public school. They're not wrong to stack those stones. The desert respects a good pile of explanations and still asks for one more. Whispers grow around materials. Metasurfaces that shepherd radar away like a host with a guest list. Lattice frames that turn bulk into geometry so light it clocks in as a rumor. Power systems that hide their footprint in bands most microphones don't claim. If such things fly, they would look like arrogance from the ground. Quiet, abrupt. uninterested in being photographed by a phone that wants a roar before it will focus. A watcher films 3 points that rotate in place, then depart vertically. The audio track is a dog deciding not to bark. The pixels wash a little, as if the lens can't agree with itself about what counts as motion. There's an old habit at Groom. Tomorrow's craft are loud in one domain and quiet in another, until the trade flips. What begins as radar arrogance becomes acoustic humility, then thermal discretion, then something else. If there's a path that trespasses into the forbidden words, it likely walks through neighborhoods we already know. Edge control, field shaping, energy storage that doesn't apologize for its ambition. We can write plausible recipes all night and end with the same sentence, no resolution. The value isn't in the answer. It's in the outline of a problem that keeps drawing itself over Nevada. 3 lights that behave like a single intention. Descents that pause. Rotations that prefer right angles to arcs. A silence thick enough to hear yourself guess. So what do we do with a wish that might be a plan in disguise? We document the habits of the sky, as if the sky were trying to be understood. We compare nights. We time the pauses. We map the ridges that produce patience. We keep the word anti-gravity in its box, and still admit that the box is interesting. If there were borrowed blueprints, this would be where the handwriting shows. Not in headlines, but in habits. The way a hull negotiates air. The way weight behaves in a turn. The way motion refuses to be loud when loud would be easier. If there were no borrowed blueprints, the habits still point to a future that makes present tense vocabulary look small. We won't claim the forbidden words. We won't close the file that keeps inviting them. We'll carry them forward the way the watchers carry extra batteries, quietly, because some nights run long.
Okay, mystery. If you're opening windows, point us to the right ridge. Keyholes, windows, and the unnamed hangar. Chapter 5. Keyholes, windows, and the unnamed hangar.
Every mystery has architecture. Out here, it's built from ridgelines, time windows, and patience. Call them keyholes, narrow places where the desert briefly lines up sight, sound, and chance. The old hands don't chase everything. They chase conditions. A north breeze to push mirage out of the basin. A temperature inversion to turn the valley into a listening bowl. A moon that rises late, so the first hour is truly black. They tune out the drama and watch the dead space between signals. Windows open in odd ways. A new notum scrapes across the map like tape you're not supposed to peel. A satellite pass empties a corner of sky. A second pass asks you to look somewhere you never have. Scanner chatter goes from chatter to punctuation. One stray call sign returns after months, and suddenly 2 trucks on a dirt road make sense together. The keyhole has a clock. Some windows are written on the ground. Fresh gravel on a spur no rain could have smoothed. A pad light that learns a new habit. On at 20 past, off at 31, on again at 44 as if it remembered a rhythm. Footprints that form a triangle no one admits to walking. The desert telegraphs in negative space. And then there's the hangar that never gets a name. From a distance, it's no more mysterious than a warehouse with a great view of forever. Up close, if up close means 3 ridges away with a long lens, it behaves like a character in a story. It ignores whether the other hangars respect. Its doors don't yawn for show and tell days. When lights come on inside, they make the wrong kind of shadow. Edges too clean, brightness with discipline. Some nights the unnamed hangar teaches you restraint. A truck approaches and turns away. A crew door opens and closes on empty. You film reflected nothing for 20 minutes, and discover later that the only frame you trust is the one where a dust devil gives you scale. Other nights the field notes like to rhyme. The pad light's new habit returns. The ridgeline that's good for contrails gives you a contrail-less pass. 3 points do what 3 points do, and the black rectangle on your screen refuses to leak a single pixel more than last time. The hangar keeps its proper noun to itself. Watchers build rituals because rituals keep you from inventing things that aren't there. Tripod first, focus second, exposure third. Frame the mountain shoulder as a ruler. Write the time on your knuckles so you don't trust the phone's idea of true north. Compare against the star that will still be there when the clip is done. When enough eyes keep returning to the same few keyholes, a different kind of map appears. The map of where to look when you don't know what to call what you're looking for. It's not proof, it's choreography that outlives a single night. The desert has a tradition. Rumor, then shadow, then photograph, then a paragraph in a manual nobody admits owning yet. Have blue was a rumor until it learned to cast a headline. Tacit blue was a fable until a museum had to make room. If history is a teacher, tomorrow's confession is usually late and very matter-of-fact. Program X evaluated configurations Y and Z. By then, 1,000 field notes are a chorus. The unnamed hangar gets a name and somehow loses a little of its gravity. But tradition cuts both ways. Some things stay rumors so long they become climate, background weather for night people. They show up as habits, a rotate instead of a bank, a stop instead of a circle, a silence with edges. You can file habits without filing conclusions. You can recognize a family resemblance without declaring a family tree. What do keyholes and windows give us? Enough repeated strangeness to compare nights to each other. Enough discipline to keep us honest when nothing happens. Enough geometry to ask better questions when something does. The unnamed hangar may never choose to be introduced. The windows might keep opening on nothing that photographs well. But the act of looking, practiced correctly, is its own kind of evidence. The kind that doesn't close files, just organizes them. If a borrowed blueprint exists, this is where it would leave fingerprints. On schedules that prefer unusual clocks. On doors that don't share the base's sense of ritual. On aircraft behaviors that fit a grammar we did not write. If no blueprint was borrowed, this is still where tomorrow's machines learn to be themselves, in front of witnesses who can't yet name them without sounding superstitious. We end where we began, with a horizon that looks ordinary until it doesn't. The keyholes will still be there next week. The windows will choose their hours without telling us why. The hangar will either open or it won't. Our job is to keep the map of patience current. We leave the verdict at the gate. We carry the habits forward. We admit the part of the desert that belongs to rumor and the part that belongs to work.
If the door won't introduce itself, the comments will. Okay, folks, what's your number one Roswell question?
Missed a chapter? Click Watch Next and pretend time travel is real.
Share this with a friend who loves blueprints and spooky basements.
Bell on, lights off. Visit our Timeless Tales online shop.
Thanks for riding along with us. Next stop gets stranger. See you there.
The desert keeps its grammar. Long silences, short verbs, and sentences written in light. We leave with a map that isn't made of roads. Keyholes, windows, ridgelines, hours that behave. 3 points that choose each other first. Rotations that prefer angles to arcs. A hush with edges. We didn't close a file tonight. We numbered it. We labeled the habits that return. If there's handwriting in this sky, ours or someone else's, It shows up in how motion behaves when names refuse to help. Carry the patients forward. Tripod first. Focus second. Exposure third. Compare against the mountain's shoulder. Let the ordinary teach you the baseline. Planes that confess. Satellites that keep appointments. So the unordinary has something to stand against when it arrives. Next time, the map points east to a story that learned to live without an ending. Different desert, same rule. Wonder in. Verdicts out. See you in New Mexico.
Did the Pentagon ever confirm non-human craft? Or did headlines outrun the documents? In this video, we'll show you the one memo line everyone quotes.
Open it.
And what it actually says.
Read the line.
We'll slow the famous Navy clip to expose parallax and stack claims against records.
From wide net to hard
budget
standards.
by budget, case by case. If it breaks under evidence, it's out. If it holds, it stays. No hype, just what survives scrutiny. This is America Unexplained. The Pentagon's UAP Files. Before we chase lights in the sky, we start with paper. What was authorized? Who did the work? And what the records actually say? AAWSAP was the big tent experiment. Wide scope, contractor research, and a hunt for patterns across strange reports. Useful? At times. Conclusive? Rarely. But it left a trail. Statements.
Start with the record.
Budgets. Deliverables.
Then add context.
AATP followed as the story everyone thinks they know. Smaller, narrower, less myth, more memo.
Scope
We
was
will
wide.
show what it really covered and what it didn't. Then came the task forces and today's AARO, a mandate to sort claims into categories. Explained, insufficient, unresolved, and to close cases with data, not vibes. Most entries fold under better information. A few refuse. Those few matter. In this prologue, we set our rules. No headline outranks the document. No clip outruns its censor limits. Every claim stands next to its source. If something breaks, it's out. If it holds after the strongest conventional explanations, it stays on the board. We are not here to promise answers. We are here to earn them. Open the folders, read the lines, see what survives, and only then decide what the story really is.
Environment matters.
Tap subscribe and hype it with a like. I'll take notes, you take the bell.
If this helped you think straighter about UAPs, then hype the video if you can.
Chapter 1. A WSAP, the Big Tent Approach.
Start with the charter.
Start with the charter, not the rumor. AAWSAP was built to be wide on purpose. Collect aviation anomalies, catalog sensor oddities, compare human factor reports, and commission contractor studies that might stitch patterns across all of it.
Bigger noise floor.
Big net, bigger noise floor. What did that look like in practice? Field investigations, literature surveys, databases of sighting narratives, and technical notes on sensors and atmospherics. Some outputs were rough or speculative. Some were useful building blocks. All of them left tracks, statements, budget lines, delivery memos. That paper trail matters more than any single headline. The core friction was data quality. Reports often arrived late, partial, or stripped of raw telemetry. Sensors disagreed.
Surveys and
Timestamps
databases.
drifted. Geometry got misread. Memory is a lens, not a camera. So AAWSAP adopted triage. Eliminate the mundane first. Balloons, drones,
Sensors don't agree.
aircraft, stars, flares, software
Balloons,
artifacts. Then push the
drones,
remainder through stricter tests.
Stars,
Two truths emerged.
artifacts.
First, most incidents
Then model
bent
the
toward
rest.
conventional causes once range, parallax, wind profiles, or instrument behavior were modeled. Second, a smaller remainder resisted closure, usually because the data was too thin to decide, not because the event was extraordinary. Unresolved didn't mean unearthly. It often meant underspecified. Still, the program learned. Categories were defined before analysis to prevent moving goalposts. Sensor states and environmental context were logged whenever possible. Investigators separated narrative from measurement and flagged uncertainty instead of burying it. When a case hinged on a single ambiguous frame or an uncalibrated instrument, it was labeled as such. Useful humility in a noisy domain. AAWSAP's broad scope made it a lightning rod. The upside, cross-domain awareness, and a long view of recurring failure modes. The downside, uneven outputs and the perception that the net was too wide to be surgical. Yet that wide phase laid the groundwork. The taxonomies, the intake checklists, the close call library, that later, narrower efforts would rely on. If you want one honest takeaway, it's this. The extraordinary claim rarely survived ordinary rigor. And when it did, it survived because the data was scarce, not because the physics was shocking. That's not a letdown. It's a map for doing the next part better.
We cataloged everything from balloons to blunders, and this binder ate my afternoon. Next chapter, let's see what actually made the cut.
Chapter 2, ATIP, Myth versus Mandate. ATIP became a legend, a secret UFO office with sweeping powers. The record is smaller and sharper. ATIP focused on defense-relevant anomalies, things that could be misidentified tech, sensor artifacts, or truly unknowns, with the operator's safety as the first question. What ATIP actually did: analyze select incidents, tighten intake, brief decision-makers, and translate technical uncertainty into operational risk. What it did not do: run a crash retrieval empire, spend without limit, or chase every rumor on Earth. In plain terms, this was a narrow lane with specific tasks and a finite budget. Why the myth grew. The 2017 moment fused declassified clips, big personalities, and headlines into one story. But process, not personality, closes cases. Start with the instrument. IR bloom, gimbal roll, range error, tracking reacquisition, wind and sea state, pilot perspective. When those are modeled, impossible accelerations often flatten into ordinary motion seen through a moving keyhole. Budgets and scope matter. ATIP prioritized cases near fleets and training ranges, dense airspace where confusion becomes danger. When metadata was rich, environment, kinematics, sensor state, confidence rose and incidents resolved. When metadata was thin,
Evidence
labels stayed conservative.
More light.
Insufficient,
Still shadows.
not extraordinary. How ATIP differs from OSAP. The funnel narrowed. Less big tent collection, more case hygiene. Categories hardened. Claims had to be testable. Documentation standards improved. The work shifted from cataloging mysteries to auditing measurements. Practical rule of thumb: disagree with a headline only after you've rebuilt the sensor and geometry. If kinematics, optics, and context survive the strongest conventional checks, then the case remains on the board. If not, you have your answer, even if it's not cinematic.
Myth, mandate, Meatloaf Monday? Wrong file. Next, what the Navy clips really show.
Chapter 3, 2017 and the Navy clips. The public story detonated in 2017. Three Navy videos became the cultural shorthand for everything unidentified.
Operator risk first.
But a clip is not a conclusion. It's an instrument's perspective with all its quirks attached. First, what you're looking at. Infrared imagery with auto-tracking logic. Glare that blooms around hot targets. And zoom modes that change apparent size and motion. Camera gimbals rotate, the jet maneuvers, the horizon tilts. Your brain tries to stabilize the world and misreads geometry. Parallax is the quiet saboteur. When your platform is moving fast and the line of sight is shallow, distant objects can seem to dart sideways or accelerate without any real change in their own motion. Add wind shear, sea clutter, and tracking handoffs, and impossible turns begin to look like ordinary kinematics seen through a narrow keyhole. The famous frames, apparent rotation, abrupt slide, vanishing acceleration, each have conventional hypotheses. Gimbal roll, sensor glare, range misestimation, and tracking logic reacquisition. None of these explanations are glamorous. They're also testable. When analysts model the sensor, the airframe, and the environment together, much of the magic drains away. This doesn't mean every clip is solved to everyone's satisfaction. It means the burden of proof sits with physics before it sits with folklore. If a claim survives the strongest conventional checks, optics, geometry, wind, instrument behavior, then it deserves the label unresolved. Not extraordinary, not yet,
at 12.6
just
seconds, the
unresolved.
object is at 543 meters altitude.
The lesson isn't to
47
scoff,
degrees.
it's to
Lateral
measure.
acceleration stays under.
A slowed frame plus the right model tells you more than 1,000 dramatic narrations. And where the modeling ends, the label should be honest. Insufficient data. That honesty protects the truly strange from being diluted by the merely misunderstood.
In hands. Oh, that's my own reflection. Okay, real analysis next.
Chapter 4. UAPTF RO. The handoff from the UAP Task Force to AARO changed two things: scale and standards. The goal was no longer to collect curiosities. It was to resolve them systematically and report out with defensible categories. Start with the mandate. AARO is built to receive, triage, analyze, and close cases across services. That means common intake, shared tooling, and a classification scheme that doesn't drift with the news cycle. Each report is a packet: time, location, platform, sensor state, environment, kinematics, and any corroboration. No packet, no confidence. Triage is ruthless by design. Step 1. Is there enough data to attempt a solution? If critical fields or raw telemetry are missing, the label trends toward insufficient. That isn't a dodge. It is a guardrail against inventing certainty. Step 2. Conventional hypotheses first. Balloons, drones, aircraft, astronomical, atmospheric, and instrument behavior. Each hypothesis must be modeled against the sensor and geometry actually in play. Step 3. If a conventional model fits the observations with high likelihood, the case is explained. If it doesn't, and the data is still decent, the case sits in unresolved, pending new evidence. Methods matter more than headlines. Arrow's workflow forces analysts to rebuild the scene. Platform motion, line of sight, range constraints, weather, then the instrument. Gimbal limits, optics, IR bloom, processing. Then the target hypotheses. A pretty video is not a measurement. A measurement is the video plus the model that produced the video's distortions. Data pipelines matured as well. Reports funnel from operators through standardized forms. Sensor dumps are requested when retention allows. Cross-service databases reduce duplicate sightings. and provenance is tracked so an anecdote doesn't masquerade as a data set. Confidence levels attach to both inputs and outputs, because low quality in should never yield high certainty out. Transparency rose, but not without limits. Security classification protects sources and methods. Privacy rules protect crews, and export-controlled tech cannot be reverse documented in public. The compromise is summary reporting. Show the categories, the trends, and representative resolutions, without burning what must stay protected. It's imperfect, but it is more light than before. 2 warnings survive every review. First, selection bias. Spectacular clips are overrepresented in public, while the mundane resolutions stack up quietly. Second, survivorship bias. Unresolved often means unmeasured, not unearthly. Treat the labels as waypoints, not trophies. So what does AARO actually change? It makes the process legible. It pushes the field toward testable claims, reproducible modeling, and honest uncertainty. It rewards preserving raw data. It penalizes stories that outrun their censors. And by closing most cases with conventional causes, it protects the truly odd from being drowned in the merely misunderstood. If there is a needle in this haystack, this is how you avoid mistaking straw for steel. Standardize the hay, magnetize the search, and publish the criteria, not the guesses.
Statistics are surprisingly slippery. Shuffle, deep breath. Okay, what's actually explained and what isn't?
Chapter 5. What's explained and what isn't? Here is the scoreboard, not the rumor board. Most reports resolve when the basics are modeled: range, geometry, instrument behavior, and context. The remainder tends to split between insufficient and a much smaller unresolved. Labels are about evidence quality, not wishful thinking. Explained, most often. Balloons and lighter than air. Drift patterns match wind profiles. Apparent hover is relative motion. Drones and aircraft. Small RCS, odd lighting, non-standard angles of approach. IR signatures flare and fade, astronomical and atmospheric. Venus, stars, meteors. Temperature inversions, mirage effects, and ducting. Sensor and processing artifacts. IR bloom, gimbal roll, glare, frame rate aliasing, tracking handoffs, compression. Operational context, training ordnance, decoys, corner reflectors, known test assets. Insufficient.
Still no data
Reports missing raw telemetry, stable timestamps, or corroboration. A single ambiguous frame can't carry an extraordinary claim. Witness narratives without instrument data. Memory is a valuable lead, not a measurement. Partial data sets where key parameters, the range, the platform motion, the sensor state, are unknowable after the fact. Unresolved, the smallest pile. Cases with enough data to rule out common models, yet not enough to identify a mundane cause cleanly. They are rare because rare plus well-measured is rare by design. These are not proof of exotic craft. They are candidates for further collection. The correct response is to improve sensors and retention, not to inflate the label. Why this distribution matters? It keeps the field honest by preventing the dramatic few from defining the many. It shows where better collection changes outcomes. Calibrated sensors, synchronized clocks, multi-platform corroboration, and preserved raw data shrink the insufficient heap and push borderline cases to resolution. It also protects genuine anomalies from being diluted by modeling errors and narrative drift. If you're looking for wonder, here it is. Clarity earned the hard way. When a case remains on the board after optics, kinematics, environment, and instrument behavior have all been worked through. That survival is meaningful. But the label is still unresolved until the evidence clears a conventional path. The habit we keep is simple. Measure first, narrate second. Let the model lead the story, not the other way around.
Data quality feels like this. Let's see what the 2025 hearings actually changed.
Chapter 6. The 2025 hearings. What actually changed? Hearings promise sunlight. What they deliver varies. In 2025, committees pressed for clarity, data access, whistleblower claims, classification boundaries, and the role of AARO. The headline question was simple. Did transparency increase, and did the evidence base improve? What improved? Reporting channels, standardized forms, and clearer guidance reduced lost reports and inconsistent fields. Cross-service coordination. More units knew where to send data. Fewer cases died in email limbo. Method disclosures. Summaries of how cases get resolved. What explained, insufficient, and unresolved actually mean became easier to cite and to critique. Commitments to retention. Stronger emphasis on preserving raw sensor data, synchronized clocks, and corroboration from multiple platforms. What stayed constrained? Sources and methods. Classification still masks sensitive sensors, tactics, and capabilities. That's not evasion. It's the price of using military instruments in public debates. Anecdote versus archive. Dramatic testimonies often lacked the underlying packets, timestamps, ranges, sensor states, needed to move a case out of insufficient. Expectations. Televised friction can imply mystery, where the paperwork simply says incomplete. Hearings are not labs, they are spotlights. Claims versus AARO positions. Where claims presented specifics with data, AARO could engage, and in many cases, conventional models fit. Where claims were sweeping or data poor, AARO's answer remained procedural. Collect better, preserve better, model better. Not satisfying TV, but necessary science. What changed for researchers and the public? Clearer lanes for FOIA and public summaries. More legible categories, example resolutions, and trend overviews. Better target for advocacy. Instead of arguing over headlines, pressure can focus on data retention policies, declassification review timelines, and releasing representative case studies with scrubbable metadata. The bottom line: more light, still many shadows. Hearings sharpened the map, where process works, where it jams, and where policy needs teeth. They did not crown new truths. They tightened the rules of evidence. That is progress if you intend to do the next part right.
Oops. Well, onwards. If this is the sunlight, what remains after the glare?
Chapter 7. What remains and what's next? If the extraordinary is anywhere, it's inside better data, not bigger rhetoric. What remains is a short list, cases that stayed on the board after optics, geometry, environment, and instrument behavior were all worked through and still failed to land on a mundane cause. Unresolved doesn't mean exotic. It means the conventional path isn't yet proven. What actually advances the field? Preservation. Keep raw sensor streams, not just compressed clips. Record sensor states and platform motion alongside the video. Synchronization. Lock clocks across platforms. Without time, multi-sensor fusion is guesswork. Corroboration. Favor cases with two or more independent modalities. IR plus radar. Optical plus ESM, so models have anchors. Openness with teeth. Publish representative case studies with scrubbed metadata. Describe methods clearly enough that outsiders can replicate the modeling.
We tell crews what that
Training
UFO
the
was
human
by next
sensor.
watch, so the next report
Give crews
comes in
fast,
cleaner.
honest feedback loops. What that impossible motion turned out to be, so future reports arrive cleaner. What to stop doing. Treating anecdotes as archives. Stories guide searches, they don't settle them. Confusing classification with conspiracy. Some data is sensitive because the sensor is sensitive. Rewarding virality over verifiability. A dramatic clip without context is a trailer, not an analysis. What to start building. Standard intake kits for civilian and military operators. Checklists that capture range, geometry, and sensor state by default. Small, shareable simulators that let anyone test how instruments transform motion and light into illusions. A living taxonomy that evolves slowly, not with each headline, but with new, reproducible methods. The outcome we should want is simple. Fewer, insufficient. Faster conventional resolutions, and a rarer but clearer set of genuinely stubborn cases. If anything extraordinary is real, this is the path that keeps it from being buried by noise. We don't need more heat. We need more light and cleaner lenses.
More light and maybe a better bulb. One last page, then we'll see where this story really ends.
If this case didn't fry your circuits completely, hit like before my hoof wears out.
Now it's your turn. Leave your thoughts in the comments so we can pin them up next time.
We opened the files and followed the work. AAWSAP to AATIP to AARO. And the pattern was clear. Most cases bent toward ordinary causes when the instruments were understood. A few did not, and they remain on the board, unresolved, not exalted. That is not a disappointment. It is a direction. Extraordinary claims don't need louder stories. They need cleaner measurements. If this series showed anything, it's that better collection changes outcomes. Raw data preserved, clocks aligned, geometry modeled, sensors characterized. With that discipline, confusion shrinks, and what survives becomes meaningful. Thank you for giving rigor a chance in a topic that rarely rewards it. If you contributed reports, analysis, or hard questions, you made the work better. If you came for wonder and stayed for method, you're the reason this kind of film can exist. Everything we cited is listed below the video: program charters, public summaries, and methods. Read them, challenge them.
Thank you.
Reproduce
If you
them.
came for wonder and
The
stayed
point
for
is not
method.
to end debate, but
These
to end
moments,
guesswork.
screens paused,
So,
notes half
after the
written,
headlines and the
minds
hype,
turning over the
what
evidence
truth
are
still
why we make
holds
this
in the
work.
light?
Your
Only what the
curiosity
records
carries you
earn.
forward. Thanks
This
for
has been
watching.
America Unexplained, the Pentagon's UAP Files. Thanks for watching.